the sacred language of ancient Egypt, hieroglyphs, Ankh, and Eye of Horus. What if the Egyptians discovered that the deepest truths of the universe could not be written with words alone, but with symbols? What if every hieroglyph was more than a letter, and held another way of understanding reality? For millennia, temples, tombs, and monuments preserved a language that seemed impossible to decipher. For centuries, those figures were seen as decorative drawings or art. However, behind every bird, eye, lotus, and human figure there was a complex system that united writing, art, philosophy, and spirituality. Welcome back to Starlit Stories. Today we ask a fascinating question. How did they express that vision of the cosmos in order to pass it on to future generations? The answer begins with one of the most extraordinary languages ever created, hieroglyphs. Unlike our alphabet, they did not only represent sounds. A symbol could express an idea, an object, an action, or a spiritual principle. Reading an Egyptian wall was like traveling through a universe of meanings. For scribes, writing was not just recording information. It was preserving knowledge, keeping memory alive, and taking part in cosmic order. Writing was considered a sacred gift, linked to Thoth, god of wisdom, knowledge, writing, and time. Each inscription sought to preserve what was meant to endure beyond a human lifetime. Thus, temples were libraries of stone. Their columns, corridors, and walls did not only narrate historical events. They also spoke of the origin of the world, natural balance, the cycles of life, and the relationship between humanity and the cosmos. But the Egyptians knew that some ideas were too profound to explain with words alone. That is why they created a remarkably rich symbolic language. One of their best-known signs is the Ankh, the key of life. Today it is often associated with eternal life. For many researchers, it also represents the union of complementary forces, the vital flow, and the link between the material and spiritual worlds. In many scenes, the gods offer the Ankh to the pharaohs by bringing it close to their nose. More than handing over an object, it seems to symbolize the breath of life. Another fascinating symbol is the Eye of Horus, or Wedjet. It is associated with protection, restoration, and wholeness after adversity. Its geometry has interested mathematicians and historians because of the proportions found in some representations. Beyond its use as an amulet, it reminds us that true vision may not be just about looking, but about understanding. What if symbols were not made only to be observed, but to awaken another way of seeing reality? That question still inspires contemporary historians and researchers, and we are only beginning to explore it. The Khepri scarab was another great Egyptian symbol. When the Egyptians saw how it pushed a sphere of earth, they imagined the sun crossing the sky each day. That is why it represented rebirth, change, and the eternal beginning of life. Alongside it stands the lotus flower. Every morning it emerged from the waters and opened its petals with the light, only to close them again at nightfall. In that natural cycle, they saw a metaphor for the awakening of consciousness and the renewal of the universe. The feather of Maat reminded them that balance, truth, and justice were not only human values, but foundations of the cosmos. According to tradition, each person's heart was weighed against that feather. Beyond reading the story literally, its teaching remains relevant. Living in harmony begins with a light, honest, and conscious heart. But symbols were not the only way to express the sacred. They also used rituals, amulets, music, incense, processions, and ceremonies to unite daily life with the eternal. The word held a special place. Heka referred to a creative force linked to the power of the word, intention, and ritual. For them, speaking, writing, or reciting sacred texts was not an empty act. It was a conscious participation in the order of the universe. They also paid attention to dreams and preserved papyri with interpretations that reveal their interest in the messages of rest. Their observation of the sky gave rise to calendars and the use of decans, groups of stars that served to measure the hours of the night and organize ceremonies and festivals. Over the centuries, traditions inspired by Egypt emerged. Among them is the so-called Egyptian tarot, widely known today. Although there is no evidence that tarot, as we know it, was used in pharaonic Egypt, its symbolism was later inspired by the great spiritual and artistic legacy of this civilization. Perhaps that leads us to another question. What is it about ancient Egypt that continues to inspire symbolic tools thousands of years later? In recent decades, several researchers have returned to that question. Robert Edward Grant has explored geometric patterns and recurring proportions in Egyptian art and architecture. Teresa Bullard has studied the relationship between ancient systems of knowledge, symbolism, and the development of consciousness. Greg Braden invites reflection on how symbols influence our perception and understanding of the human being. Billy Carson, Nassim Haramein, Matthias De Stefano, and Elsa Faris have also raised questions from different perspectives about temples, ancient texts, and the connection between civilizations and the universe. Their proposals do not replace documented historical knowledge, but they remind us that the dialogue between history, science, symbolism, and consciousness remains open. Perhaps the Egyptians understood that there are truths that are difficult to explain with words alone. Perhaps that is why they left behind a language capable of speaking to both the mind and the heart. And perhaps that is why, thousands of years later, an Ankh, an Eye of Horus, or a lotus flower still communicates something beyond its form. In the next episode, we will meet Isis, Osiris, Horus, Thoth, and the great narratives of ancient Egypt. We will see that, more than simple myths, those stories explain the universe, consciousness, and the eternal journey of life. Until then, every time you observe an ancient symbol, ask yourself whether you see only an image, or whether someone, from thousands of years ago, is still trying to speak with you beneath the same stars.